Ethan Cole opened his eyes slowly. His head felt heavy, and his body ached as if he had been pulled out of a long dream. He expected to see the dull gray walls of a space transport cabin, or at least the plain sheets of his own bed. Instead, he saw high ceilings, dark wooden beams, and a chandelier burning with hundreds of tiny candles. He sat up, confused, and realized he was lying on a velvet bed, the fabric rich and strange under his hands. The room around him looked like something from a forgotten time. Tall windows were covered with red curtains, and the floor was made of polished stone that glimmered in the candlelight. Ethan swung his legs down, his boots tapping on the cold floor. His first thought was that he was trapped inside some kind of dream, but the air felt too real, carrying the scent of burning wax and old books. His heart beat faster as he tried to understand how he had gotten here. A soft laugh echoed from the shadows, and he turned quickly. At the far side of the room stood a woman, her figure tall and graceful. She wore a long gown of deep velvet, her dark hair falling over her shoulders like a river of silk. Her eyes caught the light and seemed almost to glow with curiosity. "You were talking about me in your sleep," she said with a smile that was both playful and unsettling. Her voice carried through the hall like music, clear and strong. Ethan stared at her, unsure if he should answer. He could not remember dreaming about her at all. He rubbed his forehead and whispered, "Where am I?" The woman stepped forward, her footsteps soft but firm on the stone. "You are in my mansion," she replied. "I am Isabella, queen of these lands. You have wandered far, Ethan Cole." He froze. She knew his name. He had never met her before. The sound of her voice saying his name sent a chill down his spine. Yet he could not look away from her. "I don't understand," Ethan said. "How do you know me? I've never been here before." Isabella tilted her head slightly, studying him as if he were both a puzzle and an answer. "You speak as if you do not remember, but dreams often speak truths that the waking mind hides. You whispered my name in your sleep, as if you had known me all your life." Ethan shook his head. None of this made sense. He'd been traveling through space, working as an engineer, far away from anything like this. And yet here he was, standing in a hall that looked centuries old, facing a queen who laughed at his confusion. "Is this some kind of trick?" he asked. Her smile widened. "Does it feel like a trick?" She stepped closer until she stood only a few feet from him. He could see the fine details of her gown, the silver embroidery, the way her hands were steady and calm, touch the walls, smell the air. "This is no dream. This is my world, and you are now part of it." Ethan's hand reached for the wall. The stone was cold, solid, and heavy under his palm. He could hear the faint crackle of the candles, the echo of his own breathing. It was all real. Too real. He looked back at her, his throat dry. "Why am I here?" Isabella said, "is the question only time can answer. But I can tell you this. Men do not arrive in this place by chance. They arrive because they are meant to. And you, Ethan, are meant to be here." Her words struck him harder than he wanted to admit. Part of him wanted to run, to find a door and escape. But another part of him felt pulled to her, to this strange place where nothing made sense but everything felt alive. Isabella laughed again, softer this time, but no less haunting. She walked past him and pushed open the heavy wooden doors at the far end of the room. The hinges groaned, and beyond the doorway stretched a hall lined with portraits of kings, queens, and warriors from ages long past. "Come," she said, her eyes fixed on him. "If you are going to find your place in this story, you must first walk beside me." Ethan hesitated for a moment. Then, with no better choice before him, he followed her into the shadows of the mansion. Ethan followed Isabella through the wide hall, his boots echoing on the stone floor. The air was cool, and the silence made him uneasy. Portraits lined the walls, faces of men and women from long ago, staring down at him with hard eyes. Each frame was gilded, and the eyes seemed almost alive in the glow of the candles. He tried not to stare too long, but the weight of history pressed on him. Whoever Isabella was, she belonged to something old, something powerful. "You have a strange look in your eyes," Isabella said, as she walked ahead of him, her gown brushing against the floor. "You are wondering if you belong here." "I can see it," Ethan frowned. "You keep talking like I was supposed to come here. But I don't even know how I got here. I went to sleep in one place and woke up in yours. That isn't normal. Normal is a word men use when they are afraid of what they cannot explain, she answered. But do not fear, you will learn why soon enough. She led him to a vast chamber, its ceiling so high it was lost in shadows. At the center stood a long wooden table covered in books, maps, and weapons. Ethan's eyes widened as he saw swords, shields, and armor placed neatly, as if ready for battle. Isabella walked to the table and picked up a blade. She held it with ease, the steel catching the light. "Do you know what this is?" she asked. "A sword," Ethan said, his voice flat. "Yes," she said, smiling faintly. "But it is more than that. This sword once belonged to a man who gave his life to protect what he believed in. Everything in this room is not just metal or parchment. They are pieces of sacrifice, proof of the human spirit." Ethan moved closer, his eyes scanning the maps filled with strange markings. "What do you mean by sacrifice?" Isabella placed the sword back on the table and faced him. "Every person who stood beside me, every man and woman whose portraits you saw made choices that cost them peace, safety, and sometimes their very lives. They chose to fight for something greater than themselves. That is what keeps humanity alive." Her words struck Ethan. He had lived his life fixing machines and building things, not fighting wars or carrying swords. He never thought of himself as someone who could stand in history. "I'm not a soldier," Ethan said. "I'm just an engineer. I know machines, not battles." Isabella's eyes softened, though her voice stayed strong. "That is why you are here. You are not blind with pride like many who seek glory. You understand how to think, how to solve, how to build. Sometimes the strongest defenders are not those who know how to kill, but those who know how to endure." Ethan looked at her, surprised. No one had ever spoken to him like that before. He felt both seen and challenged. Isabella walked around the table, her steps slow and measured. "Tell me, Ethan, what do you value most in life?" He hesitated, then said, "Truth and freedom. I never wanted to live under someone's shadow." "Good," Isabella said. "Then you understand more than you think. Truth and freedom are never free. They must be guarded. They must be protected from those who would take them away." Ethan glanced again at the weapons. The maps, the heavy books that spoke of battles long past. He began to realize that this mansion was not just a home, it was a fortress, a place where history lived and waited to test him. Isabella's gaze held his. "I will not lie to you. We're brought here for a reason. This mansion has stood for centuries, but it cannot stand forever without those who will carry its weight. You may not believe it yet, but you are meant to be one of them." Ethan's chest tightened. The words sounded impossible, but something deep inside him stirred. He wanted to deny it, to laugh it away, but he could not. "Why me?" he asked, his voice low. Isabella's smile returned, calm but certain. "'Cause even in your sleep, you called to me. You do not yet see the strength within you, but it is there. And I will help you see it." The candles flickered as if the air itself agreed with her words. Ethan felt a chill, but also a strange spark of resolve. For the first time, he wondered if perhaps his life had been leading to this moment all along. The night in the mansion grew colder, and Ethan could feel the chill in the stone walls. He walked beside Isabella through another corridor, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the silence. The air was heavy, almost as if the building itself was listening to them. Ethan wanted answers, but Isabella gave them only in fragments. He could sense she was testing him, watching how he reacted to every word, every look. At last, she led him into a smaller chamber, lit by a single fire in the hearth. The room was filled with scrolls and letters piled high on wooden shelves. She sat down in a carved chair and motioned for him to sit across from her. "There is something you must know," she said quietly, her voice softer than before. "This mansion is not safe. There are men who wish to take it, to see me removed, and to destroy what has been built here." Ethan leaned forward, his hands resting on his knees. "Why would they want that? From what I've seen, this place holds history. It holds knowledge." "Because power makes men restless," Isabella replied. "They fear what they do not control. I do not bow to their desires. So they whisper in the dark, and they plan in secret. They believe the crown is weak, but they are wrong." Her eyes narrowed, and Ethan could see the fire of defiance in them. Yet he also noticed the faint weariness in her voice, the weight of years she had carried alone. Have they tried to move against you? Ethan asked. Not openly, Isabella said. But they will. The signs are already here. As if to prove her point, a sudden knock came at the chamber door. Isabella rose, her face calm but alert. A guard entered and bowed quickly. My queen, there is word from the northern gate. Some of the men we trusted have broken their oath. They march with others now, and they speak your name with hatred. Isabella dismissed the guard with a nod. When the door closed, she turned to Ethan. You see? Even in this house, even under this roof, loyalty is fragile. Ethan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He was no warrior, no leader, but he understood the danger. What do you want me to do? He asked. Isabella stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. I want you to stand with me. No, not because I command it, but because you choose it. Every person who has stood here before you faced that choice. Ethan thought about his life. Back on the ships, he had fixed engines, checked wires, and lived quietly. No one had ever asked him to stand for anything greater. Now here was a queen asking him to decide, not with machines, but with courage. He swallowed hard. If I stand with you, what happens then? Then you will not only defend me, she said. You will defend what it means to be human, to fight for truth, for freedom, for honor. Her words were heavy, but they stirred something in him. He looked into the fire, the flames dancing like restless spirits. He wondered if perhaps he had been brought here for this reason, just as she said. Still, doubt lingered in him. What if I fail? He whispered. Isabella placed a hand on his shoulder, steady and strong. Then you fail trying. And that is more noble than never daring at all. Ethan met her gaze and saw no fear in her eyes, only resolve. A moment he felt a strange calm. Suddenly, the sound of shouting rose from outside the chamber. The clash of steel rang faintly through the walls. Isabella moved quickly to the door, her gown flowing behind her. Ethan followed, his heart racing. They stepped into the hall where guards hurried past, their armor gleaming in the torchlight. The air was tense with urgency. Isabella did not falter. She walked with purpose, her head held high, every step a sign of strength. Ethan stayed close, trying to understand the weight of the moment. He had stumbled into this mansion without warning, but now it seemed he had walked straight into a storm. As they approached the grand stairway, Isabella turned to him once more. This is only the beginning, she said firmly. Before the night is over, you will see what loyalty and betrayal truly mean. Ethan's chest tightened, and his mind spun with fear and wonder. He knew that whatever lay ahead would change him forever. And yet deep within, he felt a strange pull, as if destiny itself had finally found him. The sounds of battle grew louder as Ethan followed Isabella down the stairway. The heavy doors at the end of the hall burst open, and guards rushed inside with swords drawn. Their armor clashed as they shouted orders to one another, preparing to defend the mansion. Ethan's heart pounded. He had never been in a fight, never even held a weapon longer than a tool from his workshop. But now, the walls around him shook with the force of rebellion. He could see fear on the faces of the younger guards, though they tried to hide it. Isabella walked with calm strength. She stepped onto the marble floor of the great hall, her presence commanding silence. Dumbed, the guards turned to her at once, their eyes fixed on their queen. They have chosen to betray us, she said in a steady voice. But we will not give them this house. We will not bow to their greed. Stand firm and remember why you fight. Her words lit a fire in the room. The guards straightened, their fear giving way to resolve. Ethan stood at the edge, feeling both out of place and yet drawn into the heart of the moment. One guard placed a short sword into his hands. Ethan gripped it clumsily, the weight unfamiliar, but he did not let go. Isabella glanced at him, and though she said nothing, her eyes told him he was part of this now. The doors at the far end of the hall slammed open again. Men in dark armor stormed inside, their blades flashing in the torchlight. They shouted as they charged, their voices filled with anger. The clash began instantly. Steel met steel, and the sound of the first strike rang through the hall like thunder. Ethan backed against the wall, gripping his sword tightly. He could hardly breathe as he watched the chaos unfold. But then, one of the traitors broke away and came straight toward him. The man raised his weapon high, his eyes burning with rage. Ethan had no choice. He raised his own sword and blocked the blow with a force that shook his arms. Fear surged through him, but instinct pushed him forward. He swung back, the blade cutting through the air. The traitor stumbled, surprised by Ethan's strength, and another guard finished the fight with a swift strike. Ethan gasped, his chest heaving. His hands shook, but he was still standing. Isabella saw him and gave a quick nod before turning back to her own battle. She moved with grace and certainty, her sword flashing like silver lightning. Each strike she made was precise, each step steady. She was not just a queen sitting on a throne, she was a fighter, one who led not with words alone, but with her own blade. Ethan felt something stir inside him as he watched her. If she could stand fearless, so could he. He stepped away from the wall and joined the line of defenders. The hall filled with smoke and cries, the air thick with the smell of iron and fire. Ethan struck again and again, clumsy at first, but growing stronger with each moment. His arms burned, but he refused to stop. At last, the enemy began to fall back. Their leaders shouted for retreat, and they pulled away, vanishing into the night outside the doors. The mansion grew quiet again, though the silence was heavy with loss. Several guards lay wounded on the ground, and others knelt beside them. Ethan lowered his sword, his hands trembling, his body aching. He looked down at the blade, stained and real, and felt both horror and pride. Isabella stood in the center of the hall, her gown torn, her hair loose from the fight, but her eyes sharp and steady. She raised her sword high, and the guards around her lifted theirs in answer. "This night we stood as one," she said, her voice carrying through the hall. "They thought they could break us, but they were wrong. We will not bow. We will not fall. This house stands because we stand together." Cheers rose, though weak with exhaustion, and Ethan felt his chest swell with a strange mix of fear, pride, and belonging. He had come here a stranger, but now he was no longer just a guest. He had fought beside them. Isabella lowered her sword and turned her gaze to him. For a moment, the noise of the hall seemed to fade. Her eyes met his, calm and certain. "You see now," she said softly. "Loyalty is proven not by words, but by what you do when the blade is at your throat. Tonight, you proved yourself." Ethan could not speak. He only nodded, his heart heavy with the truth of her words. For the first time, he believed her when she said he was meant to be here. The great hall was still, filled with the smell of smoke and steel. The guards carried the wounded away, while others pushed the heavy doors closed, sealing the night outside. He could still hear the echoes of battle in his ears, the clash of blades, the cries of men. Isabella walked across the hall, her steps slow but steady. She carried herself with the same calm strength she had shown during the battle. Her gown was torn at the sleeve, and a thin line of blood marked her arm, but she did not seem to notice. She looked at her people, and then her eyes found Ethan. He felt his breath catch. There was no laughter now, no teasing smile. Her face was serious, filled with a quiet pride. She stopped in front of him and placed her hand over his sword, pushing it gently down. "You have done what few men would dare," she said. "You stood when you could have fled. You chose to fight when no one would have blamed you for hiding." Ethan lowered his eyes, unsure how to respond. "I was afraid," he admitted. "What? I thought I would fall. I thought I would fail, and yet you did not," Isabella said. Her voice was soft but firm. "Fear does not make a man weak. It is what he does with fear that shows his strength. Tonight, you showed yours." The guards nearby bowed their heads to her, and Ethan realized they were not only honoring their queen. Some of them were looking at him with the same respect. He felt a strange warmth spread through his chest, a feeling he had never known before. Isabella turned to the men. "The rebellion is broken, but not destroyed. They will return, and when they do, we must be ready. Tonight we learned who we can trust, and who we must stand against." The guards shouted in agreement, their voices echoing off the stone walls. For the first time since Ethan had stepped into the mansion, he felt part of something larger than himself. Later, when the hall was cleared and the fire burned low, Isabella asked Ethan to walk with her. They moved through the quiet corridors, past the portraits and the long shadows. The mansion felt different now, no longer just a strange place he had stumbled into. It felt alive, almost like it had accepted him. Isabella stopped before a tall window that looked out over the dark hills. The first light of dawn touched the horizon, painting the sky with pale gold. She stood with her hands folded, her gaze fixed on the rising sun. "This house has seen many dawns," she said, "some brighter than others, but each one means we have survived another night, and survival is not enough. We must rise stronger than before." Ethan stood beside her, silent. He felt the weight of her words and the weight of everything he had seen. He thought of his life before, the quiet days of fixing machines, the nights alone with his thoughts. None of that seemed to matter now. Isabella turned to him. "You may not see it yet, Ethan, but you have become part of this house. You have written yourself into its story." He shook his head slightly. "I don't know if I deserve that." She reached out and touched his shoulder, her hand steady. "Deserve is a word for those who sit idle. You have acted. You have chosen. That is all that matters." The dawn light grew brighter, spilling into the hall, and Ethan felt something change within him. He no longer felt like a visitor or a stranger. He felt like a man who had been given a place in history. Isabella's laugh broke the silence, soft and knowing. "Do you remember what I said when you first woke here? That you were talking about me in your sleep?" Ethan smiled faintly, embarrassed. "I remember." "Well," she said, her voice calm but strong, "perhaps it was not just a dream after all. Perhaps it was the truth your heart already knew." They stood together as the sun rose higher, its light washing over the stone walls and the portraits of those who had come before. The mansion seemed to breathe again, its shadows retreating, its strength renewed. Ethan knew the fight was not over, that more trials would come, but he no longer feared them. He had chosen his place beside a queen who carried both strength and grace, and in that choice, he had found himself.